Can you sue somebody for stealing your husband? Well, you're probably thinking, of course not. But in North Carolina, apparently you can. May it please the viewers, my name's Rich Schoenstein, and welcome to a little series I'm calling So Sue Me, where we're going to focus on civil litigation. And I'm going to start this week in Durham County, North Carolina, where a jury awarded a woman the third highest award in North Carolina history for something called alienation of affection. This is a civil lawsuit that was started in 2024 by Akira Montague against a viral TikTok star named Brene Kennard. And the allegation was that Kennard was having an affair with Montague's husband, Tim Montague, and effectively broke up the marriage. Now, that may seem like a crazy basis for a lawsuit, but following a 6-day trial, the Durham County jury awarded Akira Montague $1.5 million for alienation of affection and $250,000 for something called criminal conversation that we're going to talk about. Let's break this down a little bit, and I want to take a look at some of the pleadings in the case, and I want to take a look at some of the jury instructions, which I think are pretty informative. All right, here we have the amended complaint for criminal conversation, alienation of affection, attorney's fees, with the jury trial demanded. These are two North Carolina citizens. I'm not going to go through all of the details, which are, salacious and full of allegations about when the defendant supposedly began having sexual relations with the husband, the fact that the plaintiff and the husband were married, had a supposedly happy marriage, had a couple of children. There are a lot of allegations in here about the fact that the defendant is a TikTok star. Well, first of all, there's allegations here, if you see in paragraph 22, about how the defendant supposedly stole the husband wearing short skirts, bending over, twirling her hair in a flirtatious manner, verbally flirting. This stuff designed to entice the husband, would do cooking videos in the marital home, started to do social media posts with just the plaintiff's husband. And then over time, apparently, according to the allegations, seduced the husband and essentially stole him from this marriage. There was video evidence. You can see the defendant in self-recorded videos allegedly expressing inappropriate feelings and interactions with plaintiff's husband and all kinds of stuff like that. That's how we get through is a whole litany of actions that the plaintiff supposedly did. That gets you a criminal conversation cause of action, and then you get an alienation of affection cause of action, essentially pled based on the same kind of misconduct. But you can go on the North Carolina court website. This is publicly available. I got it easily. You didn't even have to be an attorney to get in this website. All right, so following a 6-day trial, the presentation of witnesses, the presentation of, I think, 700 pages of exhibits, the court issued jury instructions. And I wanted to take a look at these because these tell you what the causes of action are and how you get to these claims. So you go through the instructions. There are a lot of general ones about how you evaluate evidence, what is evidence, and then you get to the issues. The issues in this trial: did the defendant commit criminal conversation? What amount is the plaintiff entitled to recover? Did the defendant maliciously and wrongfully cause alienation of genuine marital relationship? What amount is the plaintiff entitled to cover? So let's take a look at this criminal because it is sort of crazy. In North Carolina, criminal conversation is sexual intercourse with the spouse of another person during the marriage. And as the judge said in the jury instructions, the plaintiff must prove by the greater weight of evidence, first, that during the marriage of the plaintiff and her spouse, the defendant had sexual intercourse with the spouse of the plaintiff. Second, that the sexual intercourse between the defendant and the spouse occurred prior to the physical separation of the plaintiff and her spouse, with the intent on the part of either the plaintiff or her spouse that the physical separation remain permanent. So there had to be a sexual relationship while the couple was still together, and then an intent to disband the couple. The instructions go on. Evidence of conduct of the defendant after the plaintiff and her spouse physically separated with the intent on the part of either the plaintiff or her spouse that the physical separation remain permanent may not be considered by you in your determination of any fact in this trial, but may be considered only for the purpose of corroborating or supporting any evidence of malicious or wrongful conduct on the part of the defendant occurring before the plaintiff and her spouse physically separated. A single act of sexual intercourse between the defendant and plaintiff's spouse will entitle the plaintiff to recover. That's crazy. One time is sufficient under this cause of action. You must not consider whether the plaintiff's spouse consented to or enticed the sexual intercourse. Meaning, in this cause of action, what the husband wanted is completely irrelevant. It doesn't matter if he egged it on, if he caused it, if he wanted it, if he didn't wanted it. It's all about the women who are the plaintiff and the defendant here. On this first issue, you must not consider whether the marital relationship between the plaintiff and her spouse was accompanied by love and affection. So for this cause of action, you don't consider love and affection between the plaintiff and her spouse. I mean, that is a lot of stuff not to consider. Plaintiff has the burden of proof by the greater weight of the evidence, and it goes on. All right. If you get past that, you have to go to damages. What amount is plaintiff entitled to recover from the defendant for criminal conversion? I'm going to jump down here. In determining the amount of money, if any, the plaintiff may recover, you may consider any mental anguish, shame, humiliation, or disgrace suffered by the plaintiff, any loss of sexual relations between the plaintiff and her spouse, any injury to reputation, any loss or support or other economic loss, any other adverse effect on the quality of the marital relationship. The loss by the plaintiff of the consortium of her spouse. Consortium means the marital fellowship of husband and wife, the right of each to company, cooperation, affection, and aid, and any amount you allow as future damages may be reduced to present value. So that is a wide open array of things to pick from, a menu to pick from to come up with damages for criminal conversation. Let's look at alienation of affection, because that was the other cause of action. That's the one that's gotten a little more attention. Here are the elements as the judge instructed the jury. First, that the plaintiff and her spouse were married and that a genuine marital relationship existed between them. So they had to be married and they had to have a quote-unquote real marriage. A genuine marital relationship is one where some degree of love and affection exists between the spouses. Some degree of love and affection demonstrated by society, assistance, companionship, comfort, sexual relationship, and favorable mental attitude between the spouses. But it doesn't say you need all of those things. You just need some degree of that. Second, that the genuine marital relationship between the plaintiff and her spouse was alienated. Alienation means the destruction or serious diminution of love and affection of one person for another. So there had to be a genuine relationship, and it had to be alienated. And third, that the wrongful and malicious acts of the defendant were the proximate cause, meaning that's what made it happen, of the alienation of the genuine marital relationship. In other words, if the married people were going to break up anyway, or were in the process of breaking up, in theory, you wouldn't have a cause of action like this. It goes on to talk about proximate cause. It goes on to give some other instructions. And then if you find all of that, you get to damages. In determining the amount of money, if any, on this claim, you may consider the plaintiff's loss of love, affection, society, assistance, companionship, comfort, sexual relationship, and favorable mental attitude which previously existed, any mental anguish, shame, humiliation, or disgrace, any injury to plaintiff's health, feelings, or reputations, any loss of support. Any loss of support, that's wide open, right? To consider, I guess, even financial loss of support, including all the pain and suffering. So That is pretty broad, again, a pretty broad menu of damages. All right. They had a 12-person jury, which is a little bit unique because there are other jurisdictions like New York, you only get 6 in a civil trial. You don't get 12. And the jury reached a verdict. So here's the jury's verdict. Did the defendant commit criminal conversation? Yes. What amount is the plaintiff entitled to? $250,000. Did the defendant maliciously and wrongfully cause alienation of affection of a genuine marital relationship? Answer, yes. What amount is plaintiff entitled to? 1.5 million. 1.5 million. So 1.75 million is what we have here. Now, by the way, $1.5 million or 1.75 million, I should say, that's just compensatory damages. There's still a punitive damages stage in this case. I think they've alleged another 1.5 million. Maybe it's more. But in theory, there are going to be additional proceedings down the road to determine if there are any punitive damages. How do you win a case like this? Well, if you get the case to the jury, which they did, successful to here, I think it comes down to how egregious the jury thought the conduct was. And I think here it was probably significant that defendant was a TikTok star with 3 million followers, and she was accused not only of having the relationship and stealing the husband, in effect, but also of flaunting the extramarital relationship publicly in their posts, in the media, to friends and families, to the public at large. And I think there's a good chance the jury didn't like that. All right, what are our takeaways from all of this? Well, first, this is not a claim you can make in most states. As I understand it, there are only 6 states that still recognize a cause of action for alienation of affection. And that cause of action emanates from some arcane notions about women being property. It was really meant to protect men from having their women, which were viewed as property, stolen from them by another man. And then that sort of changed in society over the years. And in the last century, these claims have been used more to protect women, and they've been eliminated in the vast majority of states. We also have this criminal conversation cause of action, and I don't know of many states that have that. That is a crazy cause of action. It's one of my favorite names for a cause of action because it's not criminal, it's civil, and it's not a conversation. It's something a lot more than a conversation. So I think that's a crazy name for the cause of action, also not recognized in the vast majority of states. But when you litigate, you absolutely have to drill down on the state that you're litigating in and make sure you understand the law. We have 50 states here. Not every law in every state is the same. Some states have wacky laws still on the books. Many states have different ways they look at things, different particular rules, different procedural rules. It's really important to have a local lawyer involved who knows the local rules. Now, here's a broader concept. In civil litigation, your job as plaintiff is to get to the jury. When you get to a jury, anything can happen. So much of civil litigation is about whether and what claims make it to a jury. We make motions to dismiss. We make motions for summary judgment. People try to keep the claims from going to a jury, and you see that fear is correct because you get a case like this where you go to a jury, the jury gets angry, bam, $1.75 million. One other thing. The defendant in this case, at the end, was representing herself. You will hear me say this over and over and over again. Do not represent yourself in court. If it's a criminal proceeding, if it's a civil proceeding, I don't care. Don't do it. You don't know how to do it. You wouldn't perform surgery on yourself. Don't represent yourself in court. Now, I took a stroll through the docket. The defendant here apparently had an attorney at some point, but there was a payment issue. He moved to withdraw, I think, twice. Once it was denied, once it was granted, because if the attorney isn't getting paid, a judge will generally let them out of the case. So that's what happened here. I don't know what the defendant's economic situation was. I don't know if it was possible, but it would have been better to have an attorney at the trial and even in the lead up to the trial, maybe trying to get some of these claims dismissed. Finally, the fact that there's a judgment doesn't mean that there will be payment. I don't know anything about this defendant's economic condition. I don't know if there's any way for plaintiff to recover this money, and getting a verdict is nice. Getting a win in court is nice, but fundamentally in civil litigation, it's about recovering the money, and I'm interested to see how that plays out. Winning is one thing, collection is a whole different matter. All right, there we go. A crazy stop in North Carolina to kick off this series that I'm calling So Sue Me. I'm going to be taking a look at civil litigation, different civil litigation cases that are interesting or in the news, civil litigation concepts. We're going to talk about different claims, different causes of action. We're going to talk a lot about contracts and all manner of civil litigation issues. I hope you'll follow us. I hope you'll watch. I think that's the point of it. So we'll see you soon. For now, we are adjourned.